Hello everybody and welcome to Toyah's wonderful world of weird. Currently I am working in Dubai. I didn't intend this story to be filmed in Dubai because I wrote it in the UK, but ironically being here has given a completely new meaning to the story. It's Valentine's Day coming up and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful romantic time. And this is kind of a Valentine's Day story, but it has a little twist to it. This is called The Balcony. It's a short story. I love short stories, and this is for you. Mrs. C was a sprightly, totally refurbished 99-year-old. She had a fantastic life behind her, full of adventure, laughter and love. Now widowed, she longed to reflect. Buying her forever retirement apartment, she was ready to lay down her roots. The sales blurb boasted clean air, uninterrupted views, no audible screaming, crystal clear skies at night with views of the multitude of satellites and space stations passing by. A huge selling point in this cramped world was the balcony, where she could walk and experience the breeze and the storms. The tower had 200 floors, and Mrs. C was on the top floor, and the balcony reminded her of what it was like to see further than 3 feet in front of your nose due to the planet's smog problem. On the top floors, you can see for miles and miles over the green globe below. Only those with cash to splash who no longer needed the services ground level had to offer could live unseen, unheard and forgotten, with the service bots running around them. In case you're wondering why Mrs. C is a sprightly 99 years old, her eyes were replaced when she was 60. All her main joints are now stem cell grown. She has computer chips running her biological system, and her skin was a brand new lab-grown all-in-one sheath which originated from a very young donor who was selling cells from her perfect youthful body for astronomical prices. No longer were the elderly considered the living equivalent of vampires, sapping the youth of their blood. The young were now the new boomers, cashing in on the elderly's desire to live young. Big business. The new generations were the new rich, and Mrs. C was happily loaded. She still had 50 years ahead of her, super attractive, as bright as a button, taking immense pride in herself. Dating apps went out of her life once sex bots were perfected. Now, admittedly, it took a few murders and perforated wounds and torn anal linings to get the full marketing status, but all those accidents were the fault of overzealous owners anyway. Now, bots are all bespoke. Mrs. C has everything. Her sex bot unplugged and glistening in a glass box in the corner. Her screen showing black and white film noir from 250 years ago, and the music system playing the soft rhythms of groove metal. Drones were not permitted at her level. They had to deliver 50 floors below, and the service bots then delivered all her goods via a service elevator. As the sales brochure claimed, it is a perfect paradise. But there was just one thing. Because drones were banned at her level, endless space debris was raining down 24 hours a day onto her beloved balcony. Pissed off, she would leave her breakfast table and haul all the rubbish over the edge. Occasionally, she'd recognize a crumpled satellite or space station panel and call the salvage hunters, selling the precious lithium for actual cash. The The black market was still going strong, and Mrs. C sat at her breakfast table looking out over the balcony in her paradise. On this particular bright and breezy day, 60 miles above Mrs. C's apartment, Andy, the cosmonaut, was getting ready for home leave. He'd been in space for a whole 3 years, and he was well aware he had not kept his strength training up to date, and he was quite worried about his muscle weakness once he returned to Earth and gravity. He knew from past returns it was going to be a struggle, but procrastination was his main enemy. Add to this the fact that zero gravity was causing him to have hallucinations, and he kept finding himself microwaving his underpants, sending his food packets into outer space, and forgetting to bag his turds. His space station had become hazardous. So when he saw a giant Asian hornet flying around the cockpit, it didn't occur to him, as he torpedoed his space manuals like darts at the imaginary thing, that he was about to take the whole world with him. Andy's one job was to keep Earth's tech and AI running. A slightly predictable and boring job, since these days it was impossible to hack or imitate someone or create fake news. And he watched on in terror as his greatest phobia flew around his head, swatting, screaming, ducking and diving, swatting the ugly bastard as hard as he could. But of course, there was nothing there other than the off switch for the entire planet below, which he walloped with a massive cracking thwack. He looked out of his window as a wave of darkness passed like a curtain over his home planet, shutting down entire continents. Realizing his space station would shut down too, as the off switch was also the doomsday switch, he had exactly 5 minutes to use the ejector pod and get to Earth, where he could continue his life as a cave dweller. Mrs. C was having her morning cuppa when a huge explosion erupted outside her window. Looking out, there was an ejector pod from a space station embedded in the floor of her beloved balcony. Bewildered, Mrs. C ventured out. Looking through the window of the pod, she saw an attractive young male smiling back at her, waving feebly. Mrs. C felt strangely emotional. She felt parts of her awaken. She hadn't experienced this since becoming a widow. Here was a man in her midst, real flesh and blood, his heart still beating. What should she do? These thoughts left her mind when her heavenly silence became a rumbling she had never heard in her life, as all the tech around her died. Mrs. C looked inside the apartment. Everything was down. No lighting, no humming fridges. The service box lay on the ground. Her intercom appeared dead. Walking outside into the sunlight, she looked down, and the green smog below had turned to smoke. Far below, she heard the screaming coming closer as the groundlings started to scale the building, and she knew the unthinkable had happened. A breach. Most of the climbers wouldn't make it to her level. They will start to fall around floor 80 because the anti-climb paint would kick in. Leaving the man in his pod, grabbing the glow torches, she placed them around the rooms. She never thought this day would come. Without the tech running, she dare not go to her panic room. For an eternity, she stood thinking. She stood by the ejected pod, looking at the beautiful man inside, who was enthusiastically but rather weakly trying to get her to open the pod, lifting his heavy arms, pointing at the handle. But instead, spontaneously, she kissed the pod's window. Andy was determined to get out into the fresh air. He banged the window and shouted, "Open the pod!" The handle was only halfway down. Mrs. C was still working out what to do with him. She didn't want to spend a breach with a stranger, but she rather fancied him. So with all her strength, she opened the handle to the ejector pod, and Andy slumped to the floor of the balcony with no strength in his limbs. Mrs. C was contemplating having her way with him and then cantilevering him over the balcony's edge. Mrs. C, in her 99 years, had seen it all and been in far worse situations. Also, she knew a good opportunity when she was gifted one from the sky. As the pod door opened, she caught Andy as he fell to the floor, and she scooped him up over her shoulder and carried him into the apartment. And she sat him up in a chair. Grabbing a curtain tie, she tied the gravity-weak man to the back of a chair. And at this point, she uttered her first words. "Darling, you and I are going to have one hell of a date." She went to the kitchen and she grabbed a fine claret from the shelves, also 2 candles from past celebrations, lit the candles on the table next to Andy, popped down 2 glasses, and then popped the cork of the claret. "My name is Andy," said the cosmonaut. "Oh, don't worry about that, my man. 81 years ago, I used to be what was called a lap dancer. Strap in and buckle up, space boy. This will be a date to remember." And sprightly Mrs. C swung her leg over Andy's head, turned and twerked in his face, turned again and sat across his lap, facing him. Reaching for the claret, the poor man couldn't even hold a glass, but no worries, because Mrs. C held the glass, teased and dripped the first alcohol he'd had in 3 years into his mouth. Mrs. C continued to twerk. Now, realizing the computer chips in her body had ceased to maintain her, along with everything else in the building, she could feel parts of her squeeze, seize, and creak. Andy, on the other hand, could feel parts of him work that hadn't worked for 3 years, and a huge erection pushed against his spacesuit. Mrs. C continued to drink and grind, drink and grind. She was having the best Valentine's Day in many, many decades. Her fun was short-lived. A flicker caught her eye, and from the far end of the balcony's edge, she could see a small child peeking over the guttering, watching her. It was a moth boy. She'd never seen one before, and he was rather beautiful. Big, round, compound eyes, sweet, cupid mouth, feathered antennae, all within his human features. He had arms, legs, and large powdery wings, pulsing as he watched. But Mrs. C gulped. The groundlings had developed wings in the last 40 decades, and that's how the boy breached. The boy didn't move, but Mrs. C did, and very quickly. She slung Andy over her shoulder and ran to the pod and secured both of them inside. It was cramped, but she was super thin. She could wriggle around as Andy stayed fixed. Her husband had been a cosmonaut, and she knew within the pod there would be coordinates for a safe space. She found them in a tiny compartment, set them into the independent system, and pressed the saviour button. She had no idea where the setting and the pod would take them, but she had heard there were small islands off what used to be called Japan, where the super elite lived off the land. She looked into Andy's eyes and said, "I bet this is the best date you have ever had." Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Big love from me and big love from Dubai, where I am about to go out and play the Blah Blah Club. Lots of love, and see you in the UK for the storytelling tour. Mwah.